Hello, folks. This is your host, Charlie Dixon. Before we get started today, we would really like your help. Please rate and review our podcast with 5 stars and make sure to share it with a friend. By spreading the word, you help us grow and reach more people, allowing others to discover the valuable insights shared in each episode. Thank you so much for being an important part of the Behavioral Health Today community.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today, a podcast brought to you by the Triad Network. This podcast is designed to share trending topics occurring within the world and our communities and bring them a behavioral and mental health perspective.
Welcome to Behavioral Health Today. I'm your host, Charlie Dixon, and today my guest is Ravi Bapna. Ravi is the chair of Business Analytics and Information Systems at the University of Minnesota's Carlson School of Management and the author of Thrive, Maximizing Well-Being in the Age of AI. An award-winning scholar, Bapna's research focuses on AI, machine learning, and their effects on areas like online dating, social media, and human capital. With over 2 decades of industry consulting and executive education experience, he also founded the Analytics for Good Institute, helping leaders harness digital transformation for societal benefit. We're excited to have Ravi with us to explore how AI is positively shaping our daily lives, addressing common misperceptions, the ethical considerations around data privacy, and how AI can enhance wellness, relationships, and mental health. Welcome to the show today, Ravi.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, as we get started today, what inspired you to write your book, Thrive? And how do you see AI positively shaping our daily lives, particularly in health, relationships, education, and work?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a great place to start. So, my co-author and I, Professor Anindya Ghose at NYU, we've been working in this space for the last, 2 decades, each of us, and we were perplexed by the kind of negativity bias, I would say, around AI that we see in the media. To be honest, actually, the views tend to be extreme. Sometimes they're overly dystopian, sometimes they're overly utopian. It could be that AI is going to take over all our jobs, it's going to be the end of humanity. On the other hand, you have kind of this, enlightened nirvana with self-driving cars and, all routine work kind of, automated. And the reality is always in the middle. And what we found was as we started, interacting with, business executives, students, common people, that there is a lot of misunderstanding around AI. And if you take a step back, the reason for that is that in contrast to prior general purpose technologies, think about, we can go all the way back to the printing press, but even if you think of something like a computer or electricity, these are things that are tangible. People can see them, they can touch them, right? Whereas AI is more about algorithms that are kind of working in the background, that are influencing, what books you read or who you date or, what music you listen to or what kind of, maybe job recommendations you might get on a job search platform. And so I think that's why, because it's intangible, it's more complex, it's more layered, we felt obligated to try to, write a book that demystifies AI to everybody and gives them agency and understanding so that we can shape this technology for our benefit, right? It's not going to go away. And it really is, up to us to then make sure that it works in a way that benefits society.
And Ravi, I completely agree with you. I've heard so many, and mostly negative, unfortunately, stories about how AI is just going to take over, and teachers won't be able to trust the integrity of their students' work because they've just gotten it all off check. So I do believe that the media kind of paints this negative light for AI. What types of misperceptions do you think are most prominent, and how do you think that they hinder AI's potential for positive impact?
I think as you alluded to the fact, you can go sector by sector, right? So if you think about education, one of the big, misperceptions you just laid it out is that people are worried that, students will stop learning because they can just go to ChatGPT and get an answer. And while these kinds of, myths have been heard before, right? So when the calculator came out, I think people were similarly worried that nobody will be able to do, arithmetic or mathematics anymore.
Mhm.
And that didn't actually happen, right?
Yeah.
So I think what these technologies do is that they shift the baseline, right? So when I'm thinking of, let's say, designing a course, as is my job as a university professor, I can now tell the students that, look, AI might give you a baseline answer, right? Which then you have to work on and adapt and augment and, maybe, bring in your own perspectives onto that and take it further from there, right? So I think the way to think about it is that it's in many ways shifting the baseline to something that will basically take us further along in hopefully solving many of the grand challenges that are before us, right? So that's one big misperception. The another one that I hear a lot about is that it's inherently like dangerous, right? And in fact, the as we talk about it a lot in the book, more and more the evidence that we're seeing is that it is actually keeping us safe in a wide variety of environments that otherwise are prone to things like maybe hate speech, or things like if you look at technology now, like deep learning algorithms on platforms like Tinder can automatically detect unwanted images. Or we talk about examples in the book where on platforms like Nextdoor, which in the past were notorious for perhaps having people talk in not very savory terms. There are actually now technologies that can kind of detect that type of tone and language in real time, and give people a break, right, to correct themselves. And so this is I think another big misperception. And in the end of the day, I think what we're going to have is not that AI is going to take over like our humanity or our jobs. It's going to be how it's going to augment what we do, right? It could be as creative people, it could be as advertisers, it could be as people in the business world, it could be as educators. And definitely we have a whole chapter in the book on healthcare. AI is already playing a big role actually in many aspects of that industry as well. So I think the vision going forward is more of AI as a co-pilot that augments our human ability. And it does mean that certain types of tasks and roles perhaps may not be needed, but newer types of roles will be needed in advance, in addition. And I think that's what we have to shape.
Absolutely. Because I mean, the world is an ever changing place to be. And so, like you mentioned, using AI as an augment or as a way to enhance the things that we already do and have is definitely the best way. I agree with you to look at it and not necessarily focus on what may come as a negative. And Peter and I were actually talking about this when we mentioned, when he mentioned to me that you were coming. I've used ChatGPT as a parent to help with my child's schoolwork. And so I'm 40. So trying to do fifth grade math is it's not working.
That's
But
right.
I was able to use an AI platform to help me to teach my child better. So there are definitely helpful things out there as well.
Yeah, and think about building on that. One of the examples we talk about in the book is the Khanmigo, basically personalized learning tutor that was initially, I think, piloted by Sal Khan's Khan Academy. They had early access to some of the ChatGPT style models, and their vision was to give access to a personalized tutor to every student potentially that could be in middle school or could be in grade school, who might be you may be really good at math, but you may struggle with reading. And what if you could have a way to interact with the characters of the book that were assigned to you that week, so that then you become friendly with them, and then you're maybe more likely to go ahead and perhaps finish your reading assignment, right? Or on the contrary, it could be that, oh, maybe you're struggling in math, and maybe you start getting some help in that specific like topic in math, which again, maybe your parents are not in a position to help you at that point, and they could be too busy, they could be doing other things. Or it could be that just like me, like you said, when my daughter was in high school, I had forgotten all the advanced calculus that I had done in my engineering, right?
Yeah.
So I would have loved to have technology like this back in that day.
Absolutely. I never thought that I would use it for that, but it came in handy because it was a problem that I had no idea where to even find the answer, but that it gave it to me in such an easy way to understand that I was able to help him understand it as well.
We did a recent pilot in a business school environment, where we were teaching a course to 400 MBA students, many of them who have no mathematical background, but they all everybody's living in a world of data now, and they need to learn about analytics, and they need to learn about AI and machine learning and how it can be helped to solve business problems. And just like the Khanmigo, actually we designed our own bot that we gave to these students, And it was fascinating to see how once you give access to this technology in a user-friendly way, like they, without knowing advanced machine learning, they could ask questions in English, plain simple English to solve a business case. And that then actually increased their curiosity about these algorithms, which then, we saw a lot of students then using the AI as a coach to prepare for the exam, right? And, that's again, this builds on the example that you were giving.
Absolutely, absolutely. And a few conversations ago, a few minutes ago, you mentioned something about online dating, and how AI is kind of used in that platform. In your research on AI's role in relationships, particularly online dating, how has AI helped to overcome social barriers and improve emotional wellness?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is an important topic. As adults, this is, looking for love and romance is one of the most fun things in life, right? We all enjoy that. But the real world is complex. It's messy. It's full of what we think of. Actually, I can characterize these as social frictions, right? So we have this glorified image of how things used to be. If you think about it, maybe they're not that great. They were not that great, right? So maybe, in the past, the pool of people who you might connect with would be limited to the neighborhood that you lived in, or the school that you went to, or the bar that was, in sort of, a few blocks radius of where you live, right? And that historically has generated, very classic sorting, of people in the dating world and in the mating world, right? So people who are very similar socioeconomic backgrounds tend to meet, people who are like them. And as we explain in the book, actually, the algorithms that power the online dating platforms, they actually take away many of these social frictions, right? So now it could be, you could match with people that are, more closely aligned to your interests, right? Maybe, you like Mexican food and you like, working out a few times a day, and you can talk about all those things. It's not as if, you have to be really like, bold and be forward to be able to meet somebody at a bar and strike up a conversation and have a date out there, right? So it gives people who otherwise may have difficulty in finding a rich and wide variety of potential dates. It gives them access, and a lot of that is driven by these recommendation engines that have become very sophisticated over time. And you think about, we know recommendations, for example, for books and for products, for movies. But if you think about it, when Amazon recommends a book to you, you have to like the book. The book does not have to like you, right? So in the world of dating, it's a little bit more nuanced, and some of the best data scientists actually are working on these algorithms. And for me, the exciting thing is that it starts reducing some of these social frictions that actually exist in a significant way in the real world. And then once you start going beyond that, we can set up these platforms. They give us capabilities that we didn't have, for example, or we cannot have in the real world, right? So, for example, one of the research studies that I was involved with a very large online dating platform, we wanted to see the effect of anonymous browsing of other people's profiles, right? So if you go to a bar and you're looking up somebody, it's very hard to be anonymous, right? They will see you're checking them out. But on the internet, you can set it up, in the dating online dating platforms and apps. You can set it up in a way that you can either be anonymous or it can be non-anonymous. And when we got into this, we weren't sure, right, which way would be beneficial to men and in particular to women, actually, right? So if you think about the data on the heterosexual dating patterns going back actually all the way to history, women in society are not really coached to make the first move, right? So men send 8 times the number of messages that women send. Okay. So what we found was that when you make people anonymous, sometimes they are, more likely to view people who are not like them, right? So it kind of breaks down that sorting barrier. So there's more, maybe interracial viewing of profiles. You may be, interested in seeing a more diverse set of people. So that's one good part. But the other part that kind of didn't work in the favor of anonymity was that, because women are unlikely to make the first move, unlikely to send that message. Okay, when a guy checked out a woman's profile, they left what we call a weak signal, right? And that little trace, I should say, was then a mechanism of showing interest without like truly showing interest, which then triggered like, a message to come out from the guy, which then ended up, converting into a match out there, right? So you have different configurations of how people can interact with each other, which become possible online. And those we have found, we have done multiple studies of this sort, and we have found that these new types of signaling mechanisms can really help, or in some cases actually hurt certain subgroups of people. And overall, what we found was that in particular, in the world of heterosexual dating, it really enabled women to have more agency, right? And I think so that was really fascinating. And the final thing I'll mention out here is it also sort of, showcases the value of like platforms like Bumble that are designed for, basically giving women more control, right? Because instead of always being kind of responding to what comes to you, you have to make the first move, right? So you have more agency and you can exercise more choice. So I think that's kind of like, to me, a very fascinating aspect. And we're seeing AI playing a big role actually in this very profoundly human endeavor, actually.
Interesting, interesting. And I guess while you were talking, it just really made me think about something. I think that society in general, what we think of AI is again taking over jobs and doing everything automated and we don't need people anymore. I don't know how much people really realize what AI is, like how, like pieces it really plays in our everyday lives. Can you take a second and really talk about what AI is, maybe where AI was generated from or how it got started and how it can really help the general public?
Yeah, absolutely. So we start our book, like any good academics, Onindo and I, we laid out a framework, to explain AI to the people. We call this the house of AI. Okay. And when you see this framework, one thing that will pop out to you, and it will burst another myth that's out there in the eyes of the public right now, is that it's not all about generative AI or chat GPT, right? That is what people are using today. That is what, has become very, I guess, talked about in the media. But there are actually many, many more layers to AI. And in fact, in the house of AI, the foundational element is what we call data engineering, right? So this idea that, in the world today, through the systems that we interact with, through the apps that we interact with, there is a huge amount of data that's being generated every day. Okay. And if we have the ability to clean and aggregate and formulate that data in the right way, it can set us up to do very interesting things like figuring out anomalies in patterns of transactions, right? So let's say you may have experienced this if you're traveling overseas. Sometimes your bank detects a transaction that looks different from other transactions, right? That gets flagged, and that potentially keeps you safe from your card being misused out there, right? Your credit card being misused.
Right.
It helps us predict things that we are interested in, right? So, one of the most fun examples for us in the book was, this case in Budapest, where, a bunch of a hospital system was able to take data from past, basically, cancer detection, radiology, sources, and build an AI model that, given sort of, some new radiology, would be able to detect breast cancer in women. So this is the Mama Clinic in Budapest. And what they found was that when they started, giving access to this predictive model to trained, oncologists and radiologists, there were many instances. Actually, there were 22 instances where the AI detected cancer where the humans did not. Right. So imagine a world where these two things start working together, and how many more lives we can save out there. Right. So we get into kind of the descriptive pillar, the predictive pillar. There is another whole series of things that we think about in making sure that we don't confuse correlation with causation, right? So that's another big pillar of modern AI. And there is the prescriptive pillar, which tries to optimize everything subject to certain constraints that we have out there. So in the framework, there is the foundational element, which is the data engineering. There are these four pillars of descriptive, predictive, causal, and prescriptive. And that, once you do that, then that brings you to a level where you can start going to more advanced methods like using deep learning, when your data is not simple like tabular data like that we might see in Excel, but things like images, audio, video, right? The radiology example that I was giving you, right? Or we were working with a health insurance company that was building models to detect whether you had like maybe mental stress based on what you're speaking. The tone of your voice can actually predict maybe certain levels of stress. And so those audio video type data, we need more advanced methods like reinforcement learning, deep learning to deal with those. Of course, generative AI fits very well into that layer as well. And the large language models, which are in some way a predictive model or predicting language, right? They fall in that category. And then on top of the house, the roof of the house is the sense that this technology is powerful and we have to deploy it in a fair way, right? We have to make sure that we don't we know a lot of the data sets that are used to train these models can have historical biases, right? They may underrepresent people of color, they may underrepresent certain subgroups of people. And now there is a lot of research and there's a lot of science, and I advise companies on making sure that they use AI in a fair way, right? So that is how we have to think about AI. It's not just about generative AI. In fact, for the next 3 years, 70 to 80% of value to society is going to come from what we call traditional AI, like basically things like prediction that I was telling you earlier on.
Okay, okay. And I mean, it really does sound like AI is really at this point in 2024 is there's a little piece of AI in almost every interaction that we have throughout our day.
Absolutely, absolutely, right. And that was the structure of the book. So we wanted to use the lens of everyday life, right? Who you date, what kinds of relationships you have with people, your work, your education, your health, your home, as the chapters to give people a little bit more understanding behind under the hood what is happening, right? And so variety of examples that we can get into depending on which particular domain is interesting. We already talked a little bit about dating. I think in healthcare, AI is playing a big role in helping us detect disease, right? To formulate new molecules for drug discovery. That's a again a pretty big focus area. So without knowing it, you're already being influenced by it every day, basically.
We'll be right back after word from our sponsor.
Americans are increasingly concerned about mental health, with nearly 9 in 10 voters seeing it as a crisis. Mental Health First Aid provides crucial training to identify, understand, and respond to mental health and substance use challenges. Gain the skills and confidence to offer life-saving assistance. We offer courses for individuals, groups, and organizations of all sizes, including specialized training for veterans, law enforcement, EMS, and educators. Visit mentalhealthfirstaid.org or email hello@mentalhealthfirstaid.org to schedule your training and make a difference in your community.
Absolutely. And I don't think that most people really know what that influence really looks like on a daily basis. Along those same lines, can we talk a bit about how AI, when it's integrated with therapy and wellness tools, like how can it enhance the human connection for mental health treatment or even just behavioral health treatment in general?
Yeah, right. I mean, I think, if we take that education example that I was giving you earlier, right? Who has access to a personalized tutor? I think the analogy in the mental health context is therapy, right?
Mhm.
So maybe, if you have access to a certain program or you have resources and you recognize that you have maybe some kind of, mental health issues, you're lucky enough, you're fortunate enough to have access to a good therapist who you can interact with, who can you can meet on a weekly basis and get some help out there, right? But think about all those people who don't have access to that kind of a therapist. And again, if we start thinking about designing an agentic view of therapy, right? We should be able to, with some kind of pretty basic innovations on existing technology in terms of these large language models and things like ChatGPT, we should be able to provide people access to therapists in the form of virtual therapists, basically, right? Who don't get tired, who are not going to interact with you just once a week or in 2 weeks, because otherwise it's too expensive. And I think that to me is a very exciting future. We're already seeing this in education, right? We ourselves are involved in doing that. I feel this kind of agentic help is coming our way, and we have to embrace that, and we have to get that to augment the human capability that we have in this kind of mental health space, right? So early detection, giving people timely nudges to do things that are in their best interest, making sure people adhere to programs. So we talk a lot about adherence, based innovations in the book. Lots of studies. Anindya was part of a study that was looking at what kinds of reminders can we give people to do things like exercise, or go and get some sunlight. Like if you're in a very wintry climate, like I am in Minnesota sometimes, right? And giving those nudges in the right way, maybe not too personalized so that they seem creepy, but giving them in a way that makes people feel a part of a community, right? Those have been shown to actually significantly improve both physical health and also mental health outcomes out there, right? So to me, I think this is the beginning of sort of a big new wave in how we deal with mental health, and I think we're going to see a lot of tech innovation and startups coming out doing some of the things that we just talked about.
When people are sharing their data, their information, maybe even their mental health struggles online, the ideas of privacy tend to come up and who has access to that type of data. What types of trends do you see emerging in the way that different generations approach data privacy and AI usage, especially when it comes to sensitive things like health and mental health information?
Yeah, I think you're right. There is a lot of generational heterogeneity in the way people think about their data. But overall, one of the things that we have found over again, between the two of us, Anindya and myself, like 40 years of research, is that the privacy conversation should always be hand in glove with the value conversation, right? So what people don't like is people taking our data, apps, companies taking our data and not giving us value in return, right? And so if you think of this as a privacy and value pair, right, then yes, I am willing to give up some of my data if the benefit that I get from sharing that data, helps me and helps everybody else. Okay. And that order of magnitude of that help should be much, much higher than whatever perceived cost I have, right? So what we don't want is people taking our data and getting all the returns to those data go only to one side, right? And some of this is what is driving like the negative perception against platforms that basically use our data to just simply just serve advertising or personalized advertising, right? Where none of that benefit is in a very tangible way coming back to the end user. Okay. So I think in the case of healthcare, when we look at digital communities, patients like me is a good example. People are willing to share a lot of very personalized information because in return, they get empathy from other people who have the same condition as them, right? They get to share. If you have a particular type of disease, you live in a small county in, let's say, South Dakota, chances are there's probably nobody in your immediate vicinity who also has the same condition, right? So on the digital platform, you get other people who have that similar condition who you can talk to, and we are always surprised by how much people are willing to share about their treatment regimes and their prescriptions and what their doctors are saying in these environments, because what they get in return is of so much value. It's intangible empathy. It's basically a community, and maybe even practical ideas on how to cope, which are incredibly valuable, right? So I think on the flip side, our advice to companies is to always be really good stewards of the data, to think of not being a stalker, but being, I think Anindya in his book, a previous book, Tap, talked about not being the stalker, but being the butler, right? Enabling people with that data and giving them 10x in value in return for every piece of data that they take about them. And I would be honest in saying that it does not always happen in today's environment, but that's the world we have to move towards.
Right. Absolutely. So we've mentioned a bit about many different areas of life. And one thing, I'm wearing my Fitbit here. And so I want to talk about wellness and physical wellness and things like Fitbits and other tracking type devices that track metrics like sleep and maybe even behavior, such as working out and that type of thing, exercise. How can these systems intervene effectively without overstepping boundaries? Because I know sometimes I get alerts that I need to move or I should take a deep breath. My heart rate is too high. But where does that boundary go, and how do companies figure that out without overstepping?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So we have to be really thoughtful in the way we give these nudges, and they should not be sludges, to get people to do things that are in their best interest. But let me take a step back. In our book, in the chapter, we talk about the Whoop device, right? And it's the intensity of which the data that they collect, every second they're getting, maybe 100 data points about different aspects of your body, and they're using that to track, your exertion level, your rest, your recovery, right? That granularity of data, honestly, we've never had access to that in real time in the past, right? So, we give an example of, a metric like heart rate variability, right? So it turns out actually that this particular metric is a very, very important marker in a woman's progress through their pregnancy, right? And it turns out that, there is a particular pattern, where this heart rate variability actually, goes down close to about 7 weeks prior to term. And then it starts increasing. And any deviation from that pattern, like if that, that curve, if that inflection happens 2 weeks earlier, that's a predictor for maybe a preterm birth. And it basically is a signal for, the woman to go out and see an obstetrician or get some care, right? Because it's not normal. And that turns out to be just a very simple, metric that comes from a device which earlier we, probably did not track. And, the sad thing is that almost 35% of counties in the US don't have direct access to obstetricians and care. They're what people call maternity deserts. So having this advance warning allows somebody to maybe, get in a car and drive like, a couple of hours to go and see a doctor just to make sure that things are okay out there, right? So I think, that's the kind of thing that is already before us. We're going to see this, play out in a wide variety of other areas. The Apple Watch is basically a medical device. It can read your heart rate. It can model, the onset of cardiac disease, right? And give you a warning for that. So I think absolutely, the technology is there, the data is there, the models are being built. How these apps and devices interact with the users, that I think is a, fascinating area of study. What we know is that, we have to balance. I think your idea that it should not be too creepy is a really important one. Actually, too much personalization has been shown to hurt in these settings out there, right? So a better way to communicate something could be, for example, in a more general way, or you could communicate it using things like social proof, like other people in your neighborhood are exercising or walking so many hours in a day. Why don't you go out and get up and walk, right? Rather than personalizing that message to that particular individual, I think using more sophisticated and nuanced ways of communicating that, I think is going to be really important, right? And lots of research is happening as we speak in designing these nudges in the right way, right? And figuring it out. Yeah.
Nice, nice. And along the lines of assisting people with their everyday challenges. So we've talked about like online dating, improving wellness and health aspects. I want to talk a bit about people who may have challenges with doing things in their everyday life, like maybe individuals with autism or other behavioral or developmental neurological disorders. How can AI models, things like Google Lens, help them, do better in the daily life?
Yeah, there was a very fascinating study at Stanford that, was designed to test the capabilities inside Google Lens to help kids who have autism. And what they found was that, when they were able to narrate, visual clues of who these kids are interacting with using the Google Lens, right? And if you do that enough times and you repeat that, right? So those kids actually had better recognition and cognition, down the line out there, right? So there was a pretty direct impact of some of the interventions that were designed based on the data that the Google Lens could capture, which would give you like maybe, an auditory sense of who's around you if you're visually probably not processing that in the right way, or complement that with maybe even, some kind of like, other ways of giving signals like touch and other sensory methods. That over a period of time actually helped those people who had autism to have a better sense of what's going on around them, right? Which is a big plus out there. So I think we're going to see more innovations happening in that area, and it would be fantastic to get more people to think about helping kids with autism and other issues with these newer models out there, right? So I think to me that's kind of a good, what we've seen with some of the early experiments is really encouraging. but I think we can do more, which is also exciting, right? And the languages and the models have significantly improved since the time of that study. So I think that's another, good capability, because now we can generate not just, audio, we can generate video, we can use other types of imagery, and I think that could be really powerful.
Absolutely, absolutely. So as the more we speak about this, I'm really seeing that AI is a huge part of not just our adult life, but as in our children's lives as well. So as a parent, how can parents and even educators best navigate AI and the things that it is opening or expanding for our children? And what are thoughts on tools like Khan Academy has their AI tutor. My child does Kumon, and they have an AI version for that as well. So what are the best things for parents to know or educators to know as we navigate this?
Yeah, and this is sometimes a source of fear, because part of what we've seen is, with smartphones, for example, there's been studies that have shown that kids get addicted to these, and there's sort of this kind of fear of device addiction that I think a lot of parents, I think, rightly fear. So I would mention two things out here, right? One, a lot of kids today are growing up with AI in their homes, right? So there's Alexa and there's Siri, and there are all these AI agents that are going to get more and more powerful and capable going forward out there, right? And some of the research we cite in the book studies things like, can kids actually distinguish between AI versus actual humans they're interacting with? And it turns out actually they're very, very capable of making those distinctions, right? So I think the kids growing up are going to have this innate ability to know when they're interacting with AI and when they're interacting with humans, and that then allows us to think of AI as a coach, right? To think of AI as perhaps maybe augmenting, if your job as a parent is to help your child maybe read better or articulate themselves better,
Mhm.
well, you might have access to a capability within Alexa that could listen to the way your kid is maybe reciting a poem or reading a paragraph, and maybe helping them do it better out there, right? So I think that's the kind of world that we can shape. And again, thinking of this agentic role where the AI becomes a co-parent in some senses, right?
Yeah.
Because again, keep in mind that people are stretched for time, they're stretched for resources, right? And why do we have so much addiction to devices? One argument that I have read, and I think there is at least partial truth in that, is that a lot of the times this is an easy out for parents, right? So
Yes.
instead of interacting with your child and maybe reading a story to them, handing them a device is, in the short run, maybe an easier solution, but in the long run it actually may cost you out there, right? So I think we can be smarter about this, and again, this technology is here to stay, and we just have to figure out a way to make it work in a way that it starts augmenting things that otherwise we may not have the time or the capability to do.
Absolutely. And just like I was using AI for something that I did not have the capability to understand the science of friction and mass at that time, I couldn't recall it. It really did help to bridge that gap between who I wanted to be as a parent and actually putting that into practice.
Yeah, and you start scaling that out, right? So, you start scaling that out to, to multiple families and to neighborhoods and to cities and to, larger populations. That's a big impact, right?
Yeah.
If that could potentially, if we get this right, make our kids actually better prepared to go to school and absorb new concepts and get help. And so I think, in contrast, in the media, what we hear is that, oh, we have to focus on how we can prevent cheating, for example,
Yeah.
with this technology. And I think, to me, that's a very limited view. And teachers are smart, professors are smart. They have already figured out ways in which to actually augment this capability to help students go further, right? And I think that's what we need to encourage more.
Absolutely. And you've spoken a lot today in our conversation about AI's ability to augment human capabilities. So, what does it really mean to have an agent augmented humanity? What does that look like? And what needs to happen for institutions to guide AI development responsibly? Because that is also an issue at hand is being able to provide this information, but doing so responsibly.
Well, I think my view is that, at this point in time, we are far from, achieving equal distribution of opportunity and education and health and things that we would care about across the globe, right? Across the patterns, even within the US, even within the city. Right now, I'm in New York City. I think there is tremendous amounts of inequality of access to lots of things that we would like everybody to have, right? So there is no shortage of grand challenges to solve. And I think this, agentic world of AI to me is going to help our ability, so hopefully going to free up time from some of the more routine, mundane work or automate some, simple tasks so that we can, for example, give a personalized tutor to every kid going to school out there, right? Give a coach to somebody who's struggling, give a therapist to somebody who's struggling, with maybe some mental health issues. Give access to a coach, to an executive who wants to go out and make a pitch to an investor, right? So I think this hopefully will free up our capacity to solve bigger and bolder problems that face us, right? And I think that is the vision by which kind of this whole agentic and co-pilot view of AI is already shaping up. I think there are lots of forces pointing to us in that direction, and that's what we want to encourage. I think Anindya and I strongly believe that this is something that it's really up to us to make sure it works in our favor, as opposed to kind of the dystopian view that we often hear in the media.
Absolutely. You kind of alluded to it just now as well, but as we consider the future, because it's not going to stop here, it's going to continue and evolve. What are the most critical steps that we should take to ensure the benefits outweigh those potential risks, whether that's for children, whether that's for adults, elderly, however it may be, especially regarding data privacy and mental health? Like, what should we do to make sure that those things work out for us?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost we need to educate ourselves about this, right? And I think that's really the reason we wrote the book, and start get understanding and be a part of the conversation in a more informed manner, rather than just being responding to what we hear from either the tech companies or media, right?
Right.
I think, and that issue has to actually scale up. So we hear a lot of talk about how the government should be involved in regulating AI, and of course, I think there is a time and place for good common sense regulation. But I think even more important would be what we call for in the book a Marshall Plan to basically like reskill the workforce, right? The education minister of Sweden, I think, had a really nice quote which basically said that we're not in the business of protecting jobs, we're in the business of protecting workers, right?
Hmm.
So what can we do about reskilling workers who might get left behind in this? As every technology comes, there's a certain set of things that perhaps are not needed anymore. And so I think that becomes an important societal imperative. And in doing so, we have to make sure we do this in a way that gives people like much more value in return for their data than they're currently getting, right? So that speaks to the whole issue of privacy. They have to be responsible stewards of this data, and we also have to recognize that these models, left on their own, they are going to reflect biases that we have in society that have arisen from decades of, if not centuries, of like our human processes, right? So we have to be smart about deploying AI in a fair and responsible manner, and that can be done, right? I think the myth is that it is biased. No, actually, if you do nothing about it, it could be biased. But if you deploy it in the right way, right, and there's lots of active research happening as we speak in what we call responsible AI, right? I think that's what we need to educate people about, right? That how do you deploy technologies that on the surface may seem very scary, but actually could be beneficial. But they are, we deploy it in a way that we make sure that they are not, they're debiased, or they're at least not increasing existing biases.
Absolutely. Well, Robbie, this has been quite the fascinating talk. You've opened up my eyes to many things that I hadn't really thought about before and make me even more interested to learn more. Where can my listeners and I learn more about your book, Thrive, Maximizing Well-Being in the Age of AI? And where can we learn more about your work?
Well, I would encourage listeners to get a copy of the book. It's going to be available on all major platforms. And also, please follow Anindya Ghose and myself on Twitter, and, our work through the Carlson Analytics Lab, as well as the NYU, kind of analytics program. We are pretty active on a variety of platforms. So I think that's probably the best way to engage with us.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very, very much, Ravi. I really appreciate you speaking with us today.
Yeah, likewise. It was a fascinating conversation, and we wish all your listeners we hope they keep thriving.
And thank you to our listeners for taking the time to join us. The resources for this episode and an archive of all of our other episodes can be found on our webpage at triadhq.com/BHT. And we look forward to having you back with us next time on Behavioral Health Today.
We appreciate all the support from our community, and if you like our show, one of the best ways you can support it is by giving us a 5-star rating and leaving a review. Behavioral Health Today is a podcast part of the Triad Behavioral Health Network, all rights reserved.